The cost of IT in business can be staggering. From hardware and software expenses to services like internet and phone, you don't need to spend a fortune on IT to succeed. If your organization spends more than $500 monthly on any service, or you're considering signing a long-term contract, IT Enabled can help you manage your technology and minimize your costs. Contact us today to schedule a free consultation. IT Enabled, we're here to help.
Hi, I'm Tara Watson-Watkins, President and CEO of the Lufkin Angelina County Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the Connect podcast, connecting business to the community. I'm here today with my co-host, Blake Polino with BP Media Group.
Welcome back. This week we have Laura Beth Cooper of the Connections Counseling and Psychological Services here on the podcast to talk about therapy. It's a hot topic. We've heard a lot of it here over the last few years. She's going to debunk some myths and share some best tips and tricks to make sure that you're taking care of your mental health in the workplace. Let's get into that now.
We are honored today to have Laura Beth Cooper. Laura Beth is with Connections Counseling and Psychological Services. Did I say that right?
Yes, ma'am.
That's always a hard word for me to say.
It is.
So I always doubt myself. But, you know, Laura Beth, she's been an investor with the Chamber for many years, and immediately you jumped in and started speaking for us at different things. And so we're honored to have you totally on the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Why don't you give the listeners just a little bit of your background history, and then we'll talk about what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. I started with my master's in clinical psychology from Sam Houston State University, and a family situation led me back to East Texas. Okay. And I moved back here with my family, and one of my former professors encouraged me to go to the new PhD program in school psychology that SFA was offering. And of course, at that time, I was a single mom, and I was like, yeah, no way, I can't do that. And sure enough, a year later, I applied and started attending classes there several days a week, and received my PhD in school psychology. And now I'm a licensed psychologist. I'm also a licensed professional counselor. And in 2019, I opened Connections.
Okay. That's great. We need this. You know, with May being Mental Health Awareness Month, we've done Oceans Behavioral and the Burke. And now with you, we're just, you know, we're so lucky and so blessed in East Texas to have so many resources.
Absolutely. And we do have a lot of resources here. And unfortunately, Texas is still one of the places that has fewer accesses to mental health services than anyone else.
Right.
And current research shows that only 12% of people who actually need mental health services will receive it in places like Texas, especially rural Texas.
Do you think that's because we're afraid to ask for help, or is that because we just don't know how to get it?
I think there is a stigma associated with it. And I think, too, what I see being in private practice, so we kind of serve a little bit of a different population. People come to our office who hold full-time jobs, they attend school, pretty well functioning, and so they don't have the debilitating mental illness that is so stigmatized. And so I think a lot of times the individuals that we see, they tend to really invalidate themselves, like what I'm going through isn't as bad as what so-and-so is going through, and so they may really talk themselves out of getting treatment when they need it.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So tell us just a general overview of the services that you offer, and if people feel like they need help, what they can come to you for help for.
Sure. One of the things that we do is we offer psychological evaluations, and we do this for children and teens. We do it for some adults as well. For children and teens who have ADHD, they are prescribed a stimulant medication, and there are a lot of pediatricians and physicians in the area who don't want to put children on medication unless they have a full psychological evaluation first.
Right.
And the problem is that, you know, you might go to the doctor's office and they'll give you a rating scale and there's 18 questions, right? And you circle, you know, how often these symptoms occur. But unfortunately, there are several symptoms with ADHD that also co-occur with 3 other major mental health disorders. And what happens is if you prescribe a stimulant medication, but it's really one of these other things, it could make those symptoms quite worse, actually. And so it's really important that you have the right diagnosis, because that informs treatment. And so the psychological evaluations help us do that. Not everyone comes in for a psychological evaluation. That's really only for children who maybe their parents or their school is looking for more treatment, medication, or something like that. But we also do individual therapy for individuals, adults, children, teens, and we treat anxiety, depression, grief, trauma, phase of life problems, we see couples for couples therapy, marriage counseling, and things like that.
That's great. And how many people do you have working with you?
We have 10 people, including myself,
Okay.
10 therapists, including myself, and we just hired another one who will start in May.
Oh, wow.
That's
great.
fantastic. A much needed resource.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
for sure. We had a total of about 6,800 client hours last year.
Wow.
And
And you guys started in 2019, right?
yes, yes. It's a good problem to have,
Yeah.
right?
That seems to be the magic year that we've talked about in that month.
Yeah.
2019 just set mental health really into the spiraling motion,
Yes. I think it was becoming pretty popular to talk about then, but then COVID really sent us into it, and really helped people acknowledge, I am struggling, I do need help. And I think that was the turning point for a lot of people, where they stopped kind of invalidating themselves and saying, like, I need support.
Yeah.
Are
you seeing, this is an interesting, scratch my own itch, I guess, kind of question. Generationally, it seems like the younger generations are much more likely to not stigmatize therapy, and they're much more open about going to therapy and seeking out therapy. Are you seeing that in your practice?
Absolutely. And I think that there was a generation, maybe 2 generations ago, where it was very much pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Right.
Everyone's a little depressed. We all kind of struggle with this. And then their children were a little bit more compassionate. They grew up under that. And so now we're seeing their children, the children and teens today, where they're very open to therapy because it wasn't as stigmatized. They weren't as invalidated by those statements of, you're fine, get over it, it'll be okay.
Interesting.
So,
Okay. All right, that was just from
my thoughts about it.
my own curiosity. It seems like that the younger generations coming behind us are much more apt to go to therapy.
They really are.
Get into therapy.
They really are.
That's great. That's awesome.
Yeah. In fact, we see a lot of teens and kids who actually really enjoy coming.
Good.
And sometimes the problem can be that, when they've met their treatment goals, they don't really want to leave. They like having someone to talk to. And so.
Well, it's and you've created this relationship.
Yes.
That now you're the safe place.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the single most important factor in therapy is the therapeutic relationship.
Sure.
It's unlike any other relationship you're ever going to have. You might not get along with your heart surgeon or have the same philosophical beliefs, but he can still, do heart surgery,
Right.
Despite all of those things. But when it comes to therapy, you really need someone who you feel gets you and understands you. And so therapists, we don't get our feelings hurt if you need to find someone who's a better fit.
That's interesting. I've never thought about that.
So do you kind of fit someone with a therapist based on their belief systems or things like that? How does that work?
At our office, we do. So our office staff, they're really good at just getting some basic information. And we know what our therapists like the kinds of clients that our therapists like to work with. For instance, we have several therapists who are really, really good at working with trauma. Okay. And so we will, if someone calls with something like that going on, we'll say, okay, well, we're going to recommend this person or this person or this person. And we'll also refer them to our website where they can see their picture, read their bio, and see if they feel like they're going to be a good fit with that person too.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So how do you know if you need therapy? Like what road do you go down? How do you decide on that?
Great question. I think that anytime you're having some sort of major life, like some sort of impairment in functioning, right? Then I think that could be a good time to see a therapist. You don't necessarily have to be laying in bed all day and not going to work anymore. I think even if you're just struggling, if you're tired or you're feeling like nothing is enjoyable, or if you're having relationship problems, a lot of times that's an indicator that someone could benefit from therapy. If maybe their relationships aren't as satisfying as what they would like them to be. I think there's a lot of factors, and it depends on a number of things. Mm-hmm. One's proneness to mental health concerns, even just life situations.
It's interesting.
So what can we do to help take care of our mental health? I mean, for those of us that just have a bad day every once in a while, I mean, what are different things that we can do as a society, and for anyone listening that might, think, okay, I need to do those steps to take care of myself?
I think the goal is to just be more mindful and more aware of what we're personally going through and what our struggles are. I think too, like if you think about from an employer's perspective, we have, and maybe you guys are familiar with the term quiet quitting, where employees tend to, maybe they're not performing as well as they can. They're just kind of doing the bare minimum to get by. And I think any sort of level of disengagement is an indicator, right? And so I think that it's really important for employers to make sure that their employees feel cared for. And I think as business owners, that's one thing that we can do to start taking care of mental health, is making sure that people feel cared for. And when we can model that, then other people can start taking their mental health into their own hands and doing things like taking a little more time if they need it. And I know that's really, like, there are probably some business owners who are like, stop the podcast, I'm not listening to this. We don't need people taking time off. But the truth of the matter is that when we take time away and manage our own burnout, then we're going to be far more productive and a lot more happier. One of the things that I do at my office is we have weekly meetings, and my employees are not required to attend weekly, but I do ask them to come at least twice a month. And every week we sit around the table and I just ask them, what's your level of burnout on a scale of 1 to 5? 1, I'm practically on vacation. 5, I'm ready to burn the building down, And anybody over a 3, we kind of stop and say, okay, what do you need? How can we help you?
Yeah.
How can we support you today? And a lot of times they'll just say, just that you asked that question means so much. And I think it's really helpful that as a team at work, we can kind of manage each other's burnout and keep each other's stress level down to a minimum.
Yeah.
And it's really great because facilitating that, no one ever gets more personal than what they want to. They might just say, well, my dog is really sick. I'm worried about my dog. And that's all it is. It's not work. It's personal kinds of things I don't really want to talk about or share, but thank you for being there for me. And so I think, just to go back to your question, I know that's kind of incorporating some business stuff, but
No, I think it's important. I mean, we all are with our business associates more than we are with our own family.
absolutely.
So,
And so I think, to directly answer your question, just cultivating positive and supportive relationships in our lives is number one, the most important thing we can do to manage our own mental health.
I love that. I love things that subvert our expectations.
Yeah.
It's a lot of science has come out recently about how multitasking doesn't work, right? So if you're
Right,
trying
exactly.
to do
Yeah.
3 things at the same time, you're going to do those 3 things, at less than 30% efficiency.
is that my problem?
And it's definitely my problem. And even knowing this fact that I still am trying to do 5 different things at one time, when in reality, if you'll do one of those things at a time, you're going to get them done more effectively and faster than trying to do 3 at the same time. So when it comes to burnout, which in our field, so I have a video production company and media marketing company, burnout is huge in our field. I mean, because it's not uncommon for us to have a 16-hour day and then follow that up with 3 or 4 days of post-production. And so we're constantly trying to measure burnout. And the counterintuitive part, we want to just think, oh, we'll just power through it and that's the most effective way to do it. A lot of times it's not. A lot of times it's, hey, take this day off and then you come back this next day way more effective than you would have been if you just tried to power through all of that. But I love that, asking about the level of burnout. I definitely want to incorporate that with our team and how we go about doing things. That's really, really, really cool. Really, really impactful. So what can people expect when they go to therapy? I think probably early 90s, 2000s movies probably had a really strong opinion on what therapy was, and the talking about your mom and sitting on the couch and that kind of stuff. And so, but what can people expect? I think it's changed a lot.
Yeah, well, yeah. So since you're in film production, I'll say this. I have a kind of a running joke that, there's 2 kinds of therapists portrayed in movies and television. The ones who are kind of unethical and those who are really unethical, right?
Yes.
And so when someone comes to therapy, like, don't expect anything like what's on The Sopranos or anything like that. But the first thing that's going to happen on your very first visit is you're going to come into the office and the therapist is going to ask you a lot of general questions about what's going on. And these may be things that you have already written in your intake form. And so it might feel a bit redundant, but the therapist is really just kind of getting an idea of who you are as a person, what values are important to you. And at the end of the first session, the therapist should ask you, what are the goals that you have for coming to counseling? After you come here, what are some things you want to see different about your life? And the person might say, well, I really just want more supportive relationships in my life. I feel like my friends are never there for me and I don't know what I need to do about that. So then the therapist kind of behind the scenes will make plans and goals for how can the client, in accordance with his or her own values, reach these goals. And every day, every meeting that the client and therapist has together, y'all will spend time working on those goals together. Okay. And so that's really what someone should expect from therapy. Now, sometimes things come up and someone just kind of comes into the office and maybe you just need to kind of talk about things and vent about things, and that's okay. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I emphasize with my clients and even for my therapists with their own clients is that there's only so much that venting is going to help, and so, but I tend to be more like pushing people towards change than, and so I think that the therapist should always be working with the client on achieving their goals. If it resorts to this, like we're just talking or it's just kind of a vent session, that's not always as helpful. And so I think that's one of the biggest expectations people should have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. What do you see people mostly coming to therapy for in our area specifically? What are most people coming for?
A lot of anxiety. And many people really believe that, their anxiety, really and truly the biggest complaint is attention problems. And when we get into the office, it's not ADHD, it tends to be anxiety or depression. And I would say probably about 30% of the clients we see struggle with anxiety. And it may not be debilitating, but it's just enough where it's preventing them from developing friendships with their peers at school, or it's preventing them from having good work relationships, or it's preventing them from speaking up at work or being assertive in their relationship when they need to be, and things like that. And so I think that's a big one. Another statistic shows that approximately 90% of people who do seek help for mental health treatment have had some sort of trauma in their life. And when we think about trauma, we don't always think about like physical or sexual assault, but it could also be like a medical trauma, a car accident. It could be abandonment. Like even, we've seen traumatic incidents, people who have experienced trauma just by going through a divorce or, losing a very close loved one,
Trauma's been a hot topic here for the last few years. It's gotten really relevant.
Well, so interestingly, it is like, I'm going to nerd out for a bit. So it's the one mental health diagnosis that actually physiologically changes the brain.
Interesting.
And so you can look at MRI scans of the brain for people who have anxiety or depression, and they're going to look relatively normal. But for people who have trauma, there are distinct and clear differences that the brain undergoes. For one, the amygdala of the brain actually grows in size, and that's the part of the brain that creates more awareness to danger. And so it's great, like if you're always like on the lookout for a tiger, but not so great if you're just like, if your boss is just asking you for another report, right?
Right.
And so what happens is when someone's experienced trauma, their brain accommodates that environment so that it can be more alert and more attentive to dangerous situations. And so what that means is that the person then becomes more hypervigilant, looking for dangerous situations everywhere, creating quite a bit of anxiety for the person, just in everyday circumstances. And so it's really interesting.
Yeah. I think someone tweeted this or wherever it was, but it's like, I wish I could tell my body that the fight or flight response is to keep me from dying and not when I'm answering an email.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I think a lot of that sums that up. Well, very interesting. So where can someone find a therapist? How do they get the process started if someone wants to engage in therapy and get things started with you?
Yeah, sure. And, I'd love to promote my own business, but at the same time, I really just want to promote mental health. And so we'd be thrilled and honored if someone wants to choose a counselor at Connections. But again, the therapeutic relationship is so important that you just need to find someone that you're a good fit with. But if they want to find us, we have a website, connectionscounselingservices.org. We have a Facebook page, an Instagram page. I don't know the handles on those, though. I'm sorry. And then we're located at 1609 West Frank.
That's great. Well, thank you for all you do. Thank you for the love that you put into your patients. And it's very obvious that you were meant and called to do this. And I'm sure it's the same for the other 10 that work with you. So
thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your heart and sharing your services and everything that you provide for this area. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast again this week. We truly appreciate your support. If you'll share this episode of the podcast with someone that you think will find this interesting, wherever you're listening, you can hit the share button. You can send it via text or email or wherever else that you want. Just let somebody know about the podcast so other people can enjoy the show as well. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.